So in some ways, Chris, there's going to, I think, some kindred spirits here, even though we've never officially met until now. Uh, but
Yes,
not,
absolutely. I know. I feel it also.
yeah. So not only is it, two really good looking bald guys on the screen, but, but the work of story, the work of family, the work of bestowing things. I think there's a lot of I think there's a lot of similarity and synergy in the way we do our work. It's just the wording's going to be different. Is
Yeah.
that fair to
Yeah.
say?
Yeah, for sure. Yes, all of those places, the bestowing, the marriages, the family legacies, the whole idea of who we are as men, as women, and what do we do for our families? Like all of that is a passion of mine, and I know of
Perfect.
yours as well. So I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to this.
absolutely. So let's start with if you were to kind of just high level how you got into this and what it is with where your
Mhm.
passion is being focused right now. That way we can kind of then get a
Mhm.
vernacular with the conversation we can have as it unfolds.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I feel like I backed into this by accident. It was just my own personal journey of really kind of coming awake to some of the realities of my own life and my own story. My wife and I, we were living overseas. We were involved in Christian ministry in the Middle East, which is a hard combination. And we were there for about a decade. And I was leading several teams of young people who were just graduating from college. I myself was a young husband and father. At the time, I was only slightly older than the people that I was leading, and yet they were looking to me for guidance and care and parenting. It was their first foray into adulting, and I like there were some things happening inside of me. We had some young children, and there was I came awake to the reality of like I don't know what I am doing. Period. And then I also don't know what I am doing with my children, how I am raising them and growing them to be the kind
Right.
of people that I would love them to be. And then I also don't know like how am I leading these other people through a journey of their own. And so I needed to do some of my own work and was reading voraciously. Like I said, we were overseas, so I couldn't like run to the bookstore or buy off of Amazon. It was a little bit harder to get access to resources. But anytime someone came over the ocean, I had them, courier some things over with me, some books and stuff. And I basically just read everything I possibly could. And then when we came back to the States, I was very clear, like when I come back, I want to retool and retrain for another season of my life. And that is going to include some of this deeper heart work, some of this deeper soul work that involves me as a man, and then also the stories of the people that I'm with. So that's where I stepped into getting some further training, and then here I am, a couple decades later. So that's the journey. I backed into it mostly because I went to get a divinity degree and then decided to get a counseling degree instead because I felt like the counseling program fit me better than the divinity program and all that. And here I am.
Right. And so when you're talking about the idea of the story,
Yeah.
how does that apply in the way you're working with people and the people they do life with?
Yeah. Well, so I think we can think about story in a couple different levels, and I would say even different altitudes. So when you have like the general overarching story of someone, it's more like the itinerary of their lives, and that would be at the highest level, highest altitude, right? Where it's just I grew up in Colorado, I got married at this age, we had these kids, we do this job, like that's the
Mm-hmm.
general itinerary, and maybe there are some parts of that feel a little bit more important. Like I lost my father when I was young, or I lost my mother when I was young, or there was
Right.
a car accident. Like those kinds of things kind of fill the narrative, but generally it just gives the structure of what a story actually holds, like the outline. But then deeper down, there's going to be the things that are the shaping moments, the shaping experiences, the shaping beliefs and interpretations of what we come to understand about ourselves and the world, and relationships and connections with other people, and marriage and children and God, like all those kinds of things, those come into play how we are then shaped. So that's the next level down. And I think a lot of us can go like, yeah, that was a significantly impactful moment or experience. But then I want to go one level deeper, and that is to the actual moments. And just like when you read a book, it is the chapters. The book is broken down into chapters, and the chapters are broken down into sections, and the sections are broken down into paragraphs, and the paragraphs are broken down into sentences, and the sentences are broken down into words. And in the same way, like I feel like our stories as humans, we have the overall book, and we might even have some chapters, but we can actually get in and do some really important work around the words and the sentences that we lived, because we are all of those things on all those different levels. And when we enter into the story of how were the words forming the sentences of your life and not just the overall theme, that's, I think, where we actually get down to ground level. So sorry for mixing metaphors with ground level and books and all that kind of stuff.
No, I think it's perfect, because I think a lot of what people need in just navigating life is understanding something bigger going on, but then breaking it down into the tangible. What do I do with that bigger?
Yeah.
Right? Because I mean, my experience with clients in my own life has been when I become the culmination of my life. I'm the center cog of my life, and I'm the end all be all of my life. It goes disastrously wrong. You know, I got to be a part of something bigger to make sense of my role. But then even in that, I've got to break down my role into the smaller, tangible thoughts, feelings, actions, behaviors, 100%. Habits, etc.
Yeah, I feel like people are constantly searching for meaning. What is the big existential question is like, what is the meaning of life? And my response to that is, well, then what are the moments of life? How do we actually step into the moments? And it's in the moments that we begin to formulate some sense of why we're here and what our life means. And if we stay at that meta narrative and we don't sink down into the moments, then we're not actually going to be able to do much work there.
Right. Yeah, because it's incredibly difficult to reframe some large thing without, the only way through it is the small, right?
Yes, exactly.
And that's marriage work in itself.
Yeah,
if I want to change my marriage, I don't just change my marriage. I change myself in the dance moves I make within.
Exactly. And I love how you just said the dance moves, because it's not just the dance. You don't change the dance. You change the moves of the dance in order to change the dance. That's what you have to do. And the closer that we get down into those moments, the closer we get down into the words, whatever metaphor, the dance moves, whatever metaphor you want to put, that is where we can actually do some really good work. Because, I might say, like, my story at a higher level is that I grew up in a good home. My parents are still married. I have a sister, and this is all true. I have a sister who is older than I am, but she's pretty severely mentally and physically disabled and has been since birth. And so I was born into this family system that it was a stable family system. We had everything that we needed. They were a good family of faith. They're, like I said, still together, intact. So that is one thing. And so, but there are parts of that. There are some smaller sentences of that I struggled with. And that had an impact on me. And if I begin to break it down more into what those moments were, what those seasons of my life were, then I can actually enter in to not just fly over, but name the things that need to be healed in my life.
And so walk me through some of the different processes you've come up with, because if you look at your work, it's Counselor meets National Geographic meets Mountain Guide meets Safari Rafter. There's an element of like, I'm incredibly jealous but it's also, there's profoundness in the
Mhm.
way there's more going on than just the prototypical counseling relationship.
Yeah. Well, okay. So there's several things I would say. So first of all, I mean, I see the swords behind you there on the screen, and there's something to even how we've been speaking to how our lives are made up, not just the stories we've been talking about, but we understand our lives. We find meaning through narratives. This is where we have, stories that we love. Maybe they're, we're binging something on Netflix. Maybe there's, books that we like. There's fairy tales. There's stories that we love. And those stories then help us orient into some kind of meaning for ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
the swords in the background of, here I've got all kinds of books on my wall. Over here I've got all kinds of things that have meaning to me to help me orient myself. So I say
Mm-hmm.
all that, Corey, because experiences, I think, are one significant way for us to break down some of the barriers around our lives and hearts and bring into our lives some meaning. So for example, I just recently wrote a book called Sage, A Man's Guide into His Second Passage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is about a man stepping into the second half of his life. Now, there's the book, there's the content, and that is, I hope, people read it, right? That is one way of experiencing the content. But in a few months, I'm taking a group of 15 guys to Scotland where we're going to be engaging with it's going to be in January. So the rugged terrain and then the
Yep.
rugged weather gives us a metaphor for the rugged terrain of the internal world of our lives in the kind of midlife time frame of a man's life. And
Mm-hmm.
so the metaphor of the space and the time and the experience that we're going to have helps us orient ourselves to what's happening in our lives. So I am all about creating counseling type experiences
Right.
that are outside the counseling room in order to get to the places that people want to go, people want healing in, people want to explore, people want to know. And so doing that uh, all those places that you just listed on the river. I just got back from a trip in Kenya, taking some fathers and their kids, where we're working on some of that fathering aspect of helping launch these older teens out as they just head out into the world and all that. We do all kinds of experiences like that through Restoration Project. So that is a big passion of mine. And at the same time, I see people one-on-one in a counseling room, and we
Mm-hmm.
talk through things. We investigate their stories. We do that work too. So it's not all out on the trail. It is very much sometimes in that counseling office.
Right. Well, I think that's what you're describing is recognizing the importance of, and this is where, if Donald Miller is one of my favorite authors, and his whole concept
Mm-hmm.
of story that
Yep.
he helped capture for me in a lot of ways rings true, because it's that it really becomes life for me. The meaning of life is living a better story. Right,
Exactly.
because that's what it is. And so that's where the markers come into play, the experiences, the moments you're describing, and then even the anchor points, if you will. I mean, like the swords. So
Mm-hmm.
what they represent, and if you're just listening on the podcast, I have two Scottish claymores. So they're the William Wallace swords,
Mm-hmm.
and then one from Lord of the Rings, Eowyn's sword.
Mm-hmm.
And they
Love it.
represent, as a meaning to me, the role I play in my family. Right.
Mm-hmm.
One is the sword for fighting for my wife's heart. The other
Mm-hmm.
claymore is fighting for my son's heart. And then the Eowyn sword is fighting for my daughter's heart. And that's the whole point. As a father and a husband, I believe, is my role is
Mm-hmm.
having their, not that I'm in charge, but I have a role I play in
Yes.
their life. So it's my charge towards them. Right. And
Yes.
so the
Absolutely.
representation too of the meaning and the bestowing, like you're describing, because I think that's that fathering that
Mm-hmm.
with the swords, like whenever some young man captures my daughter and then becomes husband, as part of that
Mm-hmm.
ceremony, I will hand the sword to him,
Mm-hmm.
because his job becomes fighting for her heart in that way. My job
Mm-hmm.
shifts. I don't know exactly what it looks like at that point because I have not experienced it, but it's those are the representations. And the coolest thing about this is, since this has been a part of their entire life, because these swords have been in my household for 15, 17 years now. I got them right after my daughter was born, or the first one at least.
Wow.
They know what they represent. And every so often I'll come back and they've got one in their hands. Right. Yeah. And so it's just, okay, that's just kind of a cool marker, because it's something, again, to me, the power of this is kind of what you're describing of the experiences. There's something bigger going on. I'm not the end of the story here. I only play a role, a small one maybe, but I got to play 100% of my role.
Yeah. And I love that, Corey, because we play a role regardless.
Yes.
We play a role regardless. And so whether we choose to play that role or we choose not to play a role, we will be playing a role regardless. Mm-hmm. So I love being able to invite people to a posture of participation in the role that they are playing, so that they can, live into, be the person that they were made to be. Mm-hmm. And what you're talking about is in those roles as husband and father and man, like, those are important. Own them.
Right.
And if you don't own them, something else will own you. And that will be, and that's the work that I do a lot, is that people are like, I don't know what my life is. I'm like, well, who are you? And they're like, I don't know. Well, that's how we find out what your life is by discovering who you are.
Right. And then add to that, if I don't play the role, something else will own me, and something else will own that role in those people's lives.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Because I think we all are constantly looking for what's the father figure, what's the mother figure, what's the friend figure, what's the sibling figure, all of those things, because we exist in relationships. I mean, I think that's the crux of your work, right? Is we exist in relationship. And so who I'm in relationship with matters.
It does significantly. Relationships shape us. And even we can geek out a little bit if you want, but like the whole concept of interpersonal neurobiology.
Mm-hmm.
Interpersonal neurobiology is like how me as a person and how I am formed neurologically is impacted by you as a person and how you are formed neurologically.
Right.
And the interweaving of who we are. You talk about your son and your daughter, like they have become who they are by the interactions that they have had with you and your wife. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, there's some aspect of the raw material of who they are and mm-hmm. the personality that they were born with and, body that they were born with and all those things. And the interpersonal neurobiology shapes who we are. Our narratives are not in isolation. Our narratives are actually in, just like a chain link fence, that there are links to who we are that create the greater narrative of the human story.
Yeah, and I actually just heard in a book I just finished a week ago, I don't know the study they're referencing, but they are postulating that 40% of personality is what's biological. Mm-hmm. The rest is the nurturing component. It's the exactly. Filled in by the surroundings and those within.
Yes. Fascinating, isn't it? I love this stuff.
It is, but that also just flies right into the power of my wife's phrase with our kids all the way through. Show me your friends, I'll show you your future. Right? Because we are.
That's a fantastic phrase.
It absolutely is, because we are. What's the other phrase along those lines? We are the average of the 5 people we hang around most. Mm-hmm. That's we can't help but be infected by them and impacted by them and influenced by them.
Yeah. And then in the good way, and then also in the difficult way. Mm-hmm. And some of the work that you and I both do is we are helping people unravel some of the harmful, traumatic, tragic experiences that they have had in life, and how who they have become has been so marred, so influenced by the trauma that they have lived, that becomes the ruling narrative. That becomes the narrative by which they live. until they realize like, I don't want to live like that anymore, or I can't live like that anymore, or it's not working for me anymore. And I want to actually write a new narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And the part that I love about story work is that you can read your story. We can't go back and change what has happened in the past. But a dear friend of mine, she says that there is still ink in the pen, meaning
Mm-hmm.
that the story, those parts of your story have been written, but what would happen if you actually took the pen and began with intention to write a story into your life, and own with agency your own sense of self, so that you can really live the story that you want to live, that you were designed to live.
Right. That's the rephrasing it to, I can't change my story, but I can change my relationship to my story
To my story.
of what
Yeah.
was.
And I talk about this a lot. I just mentioned trauma. Like, we can't do much in the world to prevent tragedy from happening. We can do some things, right?
Right.
We can
Right.
wear seatbelts. We can wash our hands. We can, try to eat healthy. We can do some things to try to mitigate tragedy. But the reality is, we live in a world where tragedy exists,
Mm-hmm.
and it will happen to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
What ends up happening with tragedy is that it transforms into trauma, a soul-shaping, narrative-shaping event or experience. It transforms into trauma when there is not the presence of kindness, fathering, mothering, kind of kindness to help us digest that tragedy. Without kindness, it transforms into a soul-shaping trauma. And those are then the ruling narratives by which we live, the trauma experiences that we have in life.
Mm-hmm.
The beauty is that we can actually, through this kind of work that we're talking about, transform trauma back into a less powerful tragedy, where it doesn't have the rule, the ownership over us anymore. We can transform it back into tragedy. We can't take it away, but we can take away the power of it by the process of experiencing kindness in the moment by moment, word by word, kind of experiences of our stories,
Mm-hmm.
when we bring kindness into that. And so that is what all of the trail things, all the Scotland things, all the therapy, all the counseling room, that is my hope, because I believe that kindness is actually the greatest weapon on earth to combat darkness, combat brokenness, combat trauma, so that we can transform it back into tragedy. That's what gives me hope. That's where you actually are taking up the pen to write the story differently. And my counseling practice is called the Restory Counseling. That's what we do. We're helping people restory their lives in a different way, so that they can live more out of that, or live differently, not out of trauma, but out of just a less powerful place of not having that trauma over them.
Right, because that's what's also so fascinating. Just continuing the geek out section of our conversation.
Yeah.
Is, what most of the time trauma happens in relationship. Mm-hmm. Right, there was another component in there. There's another person in there that creates the trauma. Right, that whatever inciting event or experience, that's mm-hmm. what creates it. But our path to healing is in relationship.
Yes, 100%.
And I think it's Jay Stringer. I don't remember if I remember his exact phraseology, but it's almost like it's a compassionate witness that mm-hmm. we have to help mm-hmm. pull ourselves through it better, so it no longer rules us as much.
Yes. Compassionate witness. I like the word withness, that there is something about being with another person, the connectedness of being with another person. And
that's Irvin Yalom's work right there, where he believes so much in just the power of human to human relationship was the restorative thing.
Yes, it is restorative, because we don't stop. The interpersonal neurobiology doesn't stop when you're a child and you suddenly become adult. It still has an impact. We still mm-hmm. can and do. We are formed by our relationships. And I would go one step even further. You said almost. I would say that every trauma that we experience is the result of some kind of brokenness in relationship. And I want to say, whether that is an active, someone acting out of causing harm, mm-hmm. trauma, or the absence of someone in the moment of harm. that there is some
Okay.
aspect of the relationality of trauma. It is everywhere in
Hmm.
every trauma.
Okay.
Now,
So
ask me
let's.
to fully prove that. I don't have a research study that I can show you to prove that. And
I, got-
my life
but it,
experience tells me that.
well, but it makes sense because we constantly are in relationship to something every moment of the day, whether
Mhm.
it's in real physical form or historical form or
Yes.
imaginative form or whatever it may be.
Yes.
And so we don't, because we don't live and exist in vacuums. And that's part of
No.
the reason why there will be pain, there will be struggle, there will be crises and trauma that happens.
Yeah. Well, we can't not live in story.
Mm-hmm.
And story is all about the relationships that we have
Okay,
or
so
don't.
let's pivot this for a second, or maybe for the rest. Uh, let's talk to the two sides of this equation: those that need
Okay.
to restory,
Okay.
and those of us that can help people we care about restory. Because I
Sure.
imagine
Yes.
there's a synergy here for sure.
Mhm.
If I kind of get an idea of where you go with people,
Yep.
but
Mhm.
let's talk about first the idea of I'm seeing the importance of I can't change my story, but I need to change how there's still ink in the pen. So let's start using that ink.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's so many directions we could go with that. I mean, it's not because I want job security, but there is, I believe that every one of us, every single one of us, just by nature of being human on earth, has both the need and the potential to do some of this work. We need to recognize that something has come against us, that something about who we were created to be has been, I used the word earlier, marred, has been wounded, has been traumatized, has experienced some level of this is not how things should be. This is not what I was
Right.
created to be. There's some harm that we have walked through and experienced. And because most of that harm, I believe the most impactful aspect of that harm has occurred in our most innocent years of our lives, in the years where we didn't have the adult resources to be able to think through it, navigate it,
Right.
figure it out. We were kids. Most of the harm that has happened to us has occurred before we were age 10. Okay.
Right.
And I say that, and people are like, well, I'm 50 years old. I have 40 years after I was 10 years old. There's so much more that's happened. And I would say yes to that. And how you lived through those other 40 years was the result of how you found out, how you learned
Right.
how to survive as a 10-year-old.
Right.
So much of like every single one of us has to kind of reckon with the reality that there are some things that have impacted who I am,
Mm-hmm.
and that has been harmful. So every one of us needs to do some of this work. And the more that we do this kind of work, I believe the more that we can come back to who we were designed to be, who we were shaped, who we were intended to be, the life that we were intended to live. Parker Palmer talks about in his book, Let Your Life Speak. He says that the life living within me is not the life that wants to live in me. That there is a life inside of each one of us that wants to live, that and even C.S. Lewis, everybody kind of talks about this aspect of who I am on the inside is not who I am on the outside. And the integration of my inside and outside, my internal, my external, that I think is really the ultimate work of what we're called to do, regardless of your belief systems or faith background or personal awareness, whatever it is. That I think is really what we were designed to be, and actually makes us human.
Mm-hmm.
We are the only creatures on earth who have the ability to reflect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a gift that we are given in order for us to be and become, like I'm saying, the person we were designed to be. So if you're wondering, should I do this or not? Is there something about me? I'm living a fine life. I want to bless you. Call me. If
Right.
you're like, if there's nothing that feels like has been, difficult in your life. Now I talk about it too. Like there's big T tragedies and there's little T tragedies. There's the
Mm-hmm.
big T traumas and little T traumas. There are the big moments that are like earth shattering, life shaping moments. But then there's also death by 1,000 paper cuts. And so those little t traumas have just as much of a shaping influence. The words that were spoken or not spoken,
Right.
those kinds of things still shape who we are. So
Right.
that's where, and the work then is not every counselor, coach, therapist is created equal, because I think so many people focus on just, hey, if there's a problem, if there's a symptom, if there's a behavior that's not working for you, change the behavior.
Right.
And they're not getting at the deeper narratives. They're not getting at the deeper things of what is driving that behavior. What is the why behind the what? What is the issue that is really going on for you that is driving that? So if you're struggling with an addiction of some kind, for example, it's not about the addiction.
Right.
It's about what's driving the addiction, what's happening in the background. And so I would ask those that are listening, say, hey, I want to grow. I want to change. I want to become that. Make sure that you're thinking through, is the person that I'm going to be seeking or looking for someone who will actually take me to the deeper places? Right. Someone who will drop down from 30,000 foot down to ground level with me, and be with me in the moments. Back to that compassionate witness, the witness. Mm-hmm. Will someone actually be able to be with me in those moments of my story and of my life?
Right, and that's good, because I think there's that element of recognizing the importance of we are shaped by little things and big things. And mm-hmm. the more I can see that and recognize it, because the work I believe in will align perfectly in the sense that the stuff like the big T traumas that, yeah, I can label those, but I still in a lot of ways have probably Disneyland them and tried to make her lighter than they really are. Right. And I don't have the strength or the ability at times to see what they mm-hmm. really are. And
well,
then
it's terrifying to see what they really are.
Absolutely.
If that's actually really going to name what is going on here. Yep. The trauma and the tragedy is far deeper and far darker than we ever want to admit.
Absolutely. Schnarch would use the phrase of many of us would rather stay asleep than wake up, because what we wake up to is a nightmare.
Yes.
It's like, well, that is a lot of truth in what goes on in our world, because the world's not for mm-hmm. us. In a lot of ways, right? So
yeah,
when I can orient to that, it's better on using that ink well. It's kind of, to use your terminology, it's the mm-hmm. heading out into something, which then I think leads mm-hmm. us to, okay, now let's be let's be a partner in the restoring with somebody. Mm-hmm. What does that mm-hmm. look like for somebody that you get to walk alongside with the witness as you're describing? Yeah. What does that look like? Not just us as professionals, because I think this is something I do as a father, I do as a husband, I do as a friend. So what does that look like as you see it?
Well, again, so many directions we could go with that question, but the element that I think is the most important for us is to recognize just in the simplicity of presence, And so quickly we run to fixing, we run to judgment, we run to condemnation, we run to issues of shame. Like those are the kinds of, whether it's me in telling you about what's happening for me, or you being so uncomfortable with what I'm saying that you need to fix me, or mm-hmm. advise me, or give me some, Hallmark card answer, or pray for me, whatever it is that there's some kind of uncomfortableness with where we're going. And I just want to encourage people to have a posture of presence and a posture of just like, I love how Brene Brown says this, like, I don't even know what to say right now, but I'm just so glad you told me. Like, if you don't know what right. to say, if you don't know what right. to do, right, just stay present to the person. Right. And allow for your heart to be broken about their brokenheartedness. Allow for for you to be sad and angry and confused as they are sad and angry and confused. That is what I'm talking about with witnessing. Those mm-hmm. are hard words to say, right? In just being with someone else. Because ultimately, Kurt Thompson, he puts it this way, that we were all born into the world looking for someone looking for us. Mm-hmm. I love that phrase, because can you be a person who is looking to find another person and not take them out of where they're at, not fix them, not try to remove the tension or, resolve the dynamic, just be with. That, I think, is what we're all looking for. And so if you're a father, a mother, a friend, if you're a pastor, a coach, whatever it is, those are the most powerful places that you can be with somebody. And then professionally, that is where, let's not move to behavior management and symptom relief. Some of those things can be helpful right at first, but let's not hand out Tylenol and ibuprofen for the cancer of the heart, right? We might need to relieve some pain at first and help people walk through some things at first, but that's not actually diving in and helping them with the why behind the what, as I said before.
Right. Yeah. And that's so good, because I think that's just the importance of the power of presence of another human that gives room for both existences, so that you are being felt but more importantly, the person you're alongside is felt. Yes. Because typically we run up against, I'm trying to keep my anxieties at the level that's comfortable, regardless of what's going on with you. And so you share something that heightens my anxiety, I will react from that state to try to get you to calm down so that I feel more comfortable, rather than wait. What matters actually is the room for both to exist and neither dominate but just to both be felt.
Yes. And that work, in order to be able to do that, is your own personal work.
Absolutely.
Right. It's your own personal work. And, it's
incredibly hard to not stay the center of attention with people, isn't it? It's humanness. It's humanness here. Like, wait, I thought we were talking about me as you were sharing what's going on with you.
Yeah. Dan Allender says you can only take someone as far as you yourself have gone.
Right.
And so if there is something about the work that you're wanting to do with people, whether it's, as a father, mother, friend, coach, whatever it is, or as a professional, like, you have to do that on your own personal work, which is back to where we started in the whole conversation. Was I kind of woke up to the reality, like, I need to do some of my own work here first before I can actually father my children and, do this work with other people.
Right.
And, again, back in the Sage book, one of the things that I talk about in rites of passage, and the reason that I talk about passage at all, is that I believe there's two main passages specifically of a man's life. The first passage is when he goes from being a boy and he transforms into becoming a man. We can talk about that. And the way I like to talk about that, first of all, is just the task of the first passage is for the father to see within the boy, to find the man who's already existing inside the boy and to call him forth.
Right.
That's the rite of passage into manhood.
Right.
The passage but then we just, like, generally, culturally, we believe that once we become a man, that's kind of it until we die. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that there is a whole nother passage. There's a whole nother season that we have as men and women both, but I'm speaking specifically to men, that passage is to go from a man into a sage. And if the task of the first passage is for the father to find the man within the boy and to call him forth, the task of the second passage is to find the boy within the man and bring him home. Bring us home to ourselves. Bring us home to who we were meant to be. We've lived this entire life, and this is usually what happens in midlife, is, I wake up to the reality that the life I'm living, as we talked about, is not the life I'm actually designed to live. And the job I have, the family, the things, like, those things are not filling me the way that I had hoped they would. Mm-hmm. Where do I go? Well, it's actually inside, not outside anymore. It's to bring that boy home. Let him come home to you. My whole point in saying this is that spaciousness, when the boy inside of me comes home, or the boy inside comes home to me, we then, the man in me, the boy in me, that provides this spaciousness for other people to be. That is one of the hallmarks of a sage, is that other people have the space in my presence to be who they are, because I'm no longer jockeying for space in the room. I can actually sit down inside of myself and be who I am, so that you can be who you are.
Yeah, and that's so important and lacking in our world. Sadly, is like there's
It
not room
is.
for other people. It's all about who dominates, who's on top, and
Who's on top?
that there's a negative to that. Absolutely.
And there is a season, I want to be honest, like there is a
Mm-hmm.
season of a man's life where he needs to be the warrior, where he
Mm-hmm.
is seeking to dominate and he is seeking to battle and be competitive and find his way up the ladder. And I would hope that that would be in a kind way, that you're not decimating people and leaving debris behind you. And there is also a season where that comes to an end and that
Mm-hmm.
warrior can sit down and he can sit, lean, like in your background, lean the sword up against the wall because it's no longer needing to be unsheathed. It can now
Mm-hmm.
be sheathed. It can now be put away. It's still present. At any
Mm-hmm.
moment, you could pull it out, but it doesn't need to be in every moment anymore.
Mm-hmm. That's so good, man. We could talk about this for hours and hours, but how tell people that are intrigued with what you do
Yeah.
and how they can find you and learn more.
So I'll direct you to kind of three simple places. One is if you're curious about any of the books I mentioned or the book, you can find those on Amazon. Just search Sage, Chris Bruno on Amazon. You can find it. And there's a couple other books they have there too. Restorationproject.net is this men's space of providing experiences. I mentioned the Scotland trip. I mentioned some of the fathering trips and stuff. All that is on restorationproject.net. And then the counseling work that we do is intensives and one-on-one counseling. And I have a whole team of people across the country that do that. That's restory.life is where you can find us there.
Perfect. Well, Chris, thank you so much for the dialogue today and the conversation. Yeah. But also, man, thank you for the work, because this is the kind of things that are lasting. It's like when somebody gets it, I have found because I'm going to probably put myself kind of transitioning to the Sage, right? I'm 52.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And kids are getting ready to launch, and there's just some demonstrative differences coming. And one of the things Pam and I have dedicated ourselves to, as far as our story goes on a larger meaning, is we want to be a part of 100-year missions, which is the idea of you change one person or you impact one person in relationship. That relationship has kids that are impacted, who have kids, get married that have kids that are impacted.
Yes.
And so that one input could last 100 years. And that's a worthwhile thing to me, for sure.
It is. Absolutely.
But that's the power of what you're describing, is one person hearing this and doing a step towards it is a lasting legacy in some way. We don't know, we maybe won't even see it, but it is an impact of those that come behind. And that's so worth it. So, man, thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's been so great to be with you today, and just really appreciate it.